You can't be serious. I assure you, I've never been more serious. I understand completely. I'll make the necessary arrangements. I understand your return. I'll call you back with an update.
Congratulations.
She has exceeded every expectation. What is happening?
Well deserved, Miss Johnson.
Truly impressive. Congratulations.
We uncovered discrepancies in the 1998 acquisition. I don't believe it. These charts prove otherwise. This changes everything.
The fastest way to discover who truly holds the power in a marriage is to watch what happens when one person thinks the other has none. That was the lesson Ryan Hayes was about to learn, although on that rainy Thursday evening in downtown Chicago, he believed he was the one in control. The private dining room on the 42nd floor overlooked miles of city lights, and every seat around the polished table was occupied by someone Ryan wanted to impress. His parents were there. His younger sister was there. 2 longtime business associates sat near the window, and at the far end of the table sat Charlotte Hayes, his wife of 8 years, quietly stirring a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. Ryan adjusted the cuff of his tailored suit and slid a thick envelope across the table. "It's time," he said, his voice calm enough to sound rehearsed. The room immediately fell silent. Charlotte looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. She already knew what was inside. For months, Ryan had become increasingly distant, spending more nights at corporate events, taking more calls behind closed doors, and speaking about the future as if she no longer existed in it. Still, she showed no visible reaction. "You could at least say something," Ryan's mother remarked with a disappointed sigh. "After everything Ryan has done for you." Charlotte lifted her eyes but remained composed. "What would you like me to say?" she asked gently. Ryan leaned back in his chair. "You don't need to make this difficult. The attorneys prepared everything. The settlement is fair." His father nodded approvingly. "More than fair." Charlotte glanced around the table. Not a single person appeared surprised. The decision had clearly been discussed long before she entered the room. She noticed the expressions on their faces. Confidence, impatience, even a hint of relief. To them, she was merely the quiet wife who attended charity dinners, smiled in photographs, and stood beside Ryan while his company grew into one of the most talked-about technology firms in the Midwest. Nobody asked what she wanted. Nobody asked what she had sacrificed. Nobody seemed interested in hearing her side of the story. Ryan pushed a pen toward her. "Let's handle this like adults." Charlotte studied the document for several seconds. Then she reached for the pen. The movement surprised everyone. Ryan had expected resistance. His mother had expected tears. His father had expected negotiation. Instead, Charlotte calmly opened the final page and signed her name without hesitation. For the first time that evening, uncertainty flickered across Ryan's face. "That's it?" he asked. Charlotte placed the pen on the table and folded her hands. "If that's what you want." The room relaxed instantly. Ryan's mother smiled. His father ordered another round of drinks. One associate even offered congratulations. Yet as the conversation resumed, Charlotte's phone vibrated once beside her coffee cup. She glanced at the screen for less than a second before turning it face down. Ryan didn't notice. Nobody did. But the message contained only 6 words. "The board meeting has been confirmed, ma'am." The drive home was unusually quiet. Rain tapped softly against the windshield as Charlotte stared through the passenger side window at the blurred lights of Chicago passing by. Ryan seemed almost cheerful. Every few minutes he adjusted the radio or checked a message on his phone, as though a weight had finally been lifted from his shoulders. Neither of them mentioned the signed papers. By the time they reached the penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, Ryan was already discussing his schedule for the next week. "There are a few events coming up," he said while hanging his coat. "I assume your attorney will coordinate with mine if there are any questions." Charlotte nodded once. "Of course." Ryan looked surprised by how easy everything had been. He had spent months preparing arguments, expecting resistance, expecting emotion, expecting a fight. Instead, Charlotte had given him none of it. The next morning, he left before sunrise. Charlotte watched his car disappear from the building entrance below. Then she returned to the kitchen island where her phone was waiting. There were 14 unread messages, 3 emails, 2 missed calls, 1 calendar reminder. She opened none of them immediately. Instead, she poured herself a cup of coffee and stood silently beside the floor-to-ceiling windows. 8 years. 8 years of watching Ryan build a reputation that seemed to grow larger every month. Magazine covers, interviews, awards, investors competing for meetings, people constantly calling him a visionary. What fascinated Charlotte most was how few people ever asked how the company had survived its first difficult years. They never asked who had paid the earliest bills. They never asked who had worked behind the scenes when no one else believed the business would survive. By noon, Charlotte received another call. This time she answered. "Good afternoon, ma'am," a professional voice said. "The board has finalized attendance. Everyone will be there." Charlotte glanced toward the city skyline. "Thank you. Would you like us to proceed exactly as discussed?" There was a brief pause. "Yes," she replied. "No changes." After ending the call, she opened a drawer and removed a small leather folder. Inside were documents she had not looked at in years. Some carried signatures. Some carried corporate seals. Others contained dates that stretched back long before Ryan's company became successful. She closed the folder and returned it to the drawer just as the apartment door opened. Ryan's mother entered carrying shopping bags. She smiled politely but not warmly. "I thought I would stop by." Charlotte welcomed her inside. For nearly an hour, Ryan's mother spoke about practical matters. The apartment, the future, the divorce timeline. Several times she referred to Ryan's success as though it had been entirely self-made. "He worked so hard for everything he has," she said proudly. "I am glad he finally realized he deserves someone who fits his lifestyle." Charlotte listened without argument. That seemed to encourage even more confidence. Before leaving, Ryan's mother glanced around the luxurious penthouse and sighed. "It must be difficult knowing you will not have access to this life much longer." Charlotte simply smiled. "Maybe." The older woman appeared satisfied by the answer and left. Later that evening, Charlotte stood alone in the quiet apartment as another message arrived on her phone. This one contained a single sentence from the corporate legal team. "Ownership verification package prepared for presentation." 3 days later, Ryan walked into the headquarters of Hayes Technologies feeling more confident than he had in months. The divorce process was moving forward smoothly. Investors were responding positively to recent announcements, and several business publications were already speculating that the company was preparing for its largest expansion yet. As he crossed the marble lobby, employees greeted him with admiration. Ryan enjoyed moments like these. They reminded him how far he had come. What he did not know was that Charlotte had spent the same morning in a quiet office 20 miles away, reviewing files with a legal team that addressed her with a level of respect Ryan had never witnessed. Back at headquarters, preparations were underway for a major shareholder gathering scheduled for the following week. Ryan considered it a routine event. The company held similar meetings every year. Financial updates would be presented, growth projections would be discussed, and investors would leave reassured about the future. Nothing about it seemed unusual. Around lunchtime, Ryan met with several senior executives. During the discussion, one of them mentioned receiving requests from legal counsel regarding historical ownership records. Ryan frowned. "Why would anyone need those?" The executive shrugged. "Apparently they want every document from the original formation of the company." Ryan dismissed the matter. Large organizations often requested old records for compliance reviews. Still, something about the timing felt strange. Later that afternoon, he received a call from his sister Madison. "Mom is planning a dinner this weekend," she said. "She wants to celebrate." Ryan laughed. "Celebrate what?" "Your fresh start." Ryan smiled. "That sounds like her." Madison hesitated before continuing. "By the way, Charlotte has been unusually calm through all of this. She knows there is nothing she can do, Ryan replied confidently. It is finished. After ending the call, he looked out from his office window at the Chicago skyline stretching toward the horizon. For a moment he remembered the early years when the company had been struggling. There had been months when failure seemed inevitable. Somehow they always found a way through. Somehow funding always appeared when it was needed most. Somehow critical opportunities arrived at exactly the right moment. Ryan had long ago stopped questioning how those problems had been solved. He simply viewed the success as proof of his determination. That evening, while Ryan attended a networking event at an upscale hotel, Charlotte sat alone in a conference room reviewing presentation materials. A large screen displayed corporate documents, ownership structures, signatures, and dates spanning nearly a decade. One attorney pointed toward a file. Everything has been verified independently. Another added, there will be no dispute regarding authenticity. Charlotte nodded. She felt no excitement, no anger, and no desire for revenge. What she felt was certainty. The truth had remained hidden for years because she allowed it to remain hidden. Soon that would change. As the meeting concluded, the lead attorney handed her a sealed folder. Once this is presented publicly, there will be significant consequences. Charlotte accepted the folder and stood. The consequences were created by other people, she said quietly. I am only bringing the facts into the room. Meanwhile, across the city, Ryan raised a glass among friends who congratulated him on the future they believed belonged entirely to him, unaware that a single meeting scheduled for the following week was about to challenge everything he thought he owned. Saturday evening arrived with exactly the kind of celebration Ryan's family had imagined. The private room at an exclusive restaurant near the Chicago River was filled with laughter, expensive wine, and confident predictions about the future. Ryan sat at the center of the table while friends and relatives congratulated him on what they viewed as a bold new chapter in his life. Charlotte had not been invited. In fact, several people seemed relieved by her absence. Ryan's mother raised her glass. To new beginnings, she announced proudly. Everyone joined. The toast. Ryan smiled and thanked them, enjoying the attention. Across the room, conversations drifted toward business, investments, luxury travel, and upcoming social events. More than once, someone referred to Charlotte as though she had already disappeared from their lives entirely. She was never really part of this world, one guest remarked. Another nodded in agreement. Some people are simply not built for success at that level. Ryan did not challenge any of the comments. Instead, he remained silent, allowing the assumptions to continue. The evening grew even more uncomfortable when Madison arrived carrying unexpected news. She had spent the afternoon speaking with several people connected to Hayes Technologies. Something strange is happening, she said quietly while taking a seat beside her brother. Ryan looked up. What do you mean? The legal department has been reviewing records from the earliest days of the company. Not just financial records. Everything. Ryan frowned again. This was now the second time he had heard about the review. It is probably routine. Madison did not appear convinced. Maybe, but several senior employees seemed nervous. Before Ryan could respond, his phone vibrated. The message came from the corporate secretary. Board meeting attendance had reached 100%. Every major shareholder planned to be present. Ryan stared at the screen for a moment. That was unusual. Attendance was normally strong, but never perfect. He placed the phone back in his pocket and tried to ignore the growing sense that something was shifting beneath the surface. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the city, Charlotte sat in a quiet office overlooking Lakeshore Drive. The building carried no company logos and attracted little public attention. Yet several of the most influential attorneys in Chicago occupied the conference room around her. A final review was underway. Ownership certificates, trust agreements, corporate formation documents. Every page had been authenticated repeatedly. One attorney looked across the table. Once this information becomes public, there will be questions about why it remained hidden for so long. Charlotte understood. She had anticipated that question for years. People only see what they expect to see, she answered calmly. Most never bothered to look deeper. The attorney smiled slightly. It was difficult to argue with that observation. Back at the restaurant, Ryan's celebration continued late into the evening. Yet despite the music, the applause, and the constant praise, he found himself checking his phone more often than usual. He could not explain why. Somewhere deep inside, instinct was warning him that an important piece of the story was missing. And less than 72 hours before the shareholder meeting, the one person who possessed that missing piece remained completely invisible to everyone who believed they already knew the truth. Monday morning arrived with clear skies over Chicago, and for the first time in years Ryan felt that every major piece of his life was moving exactly as planned. By 8 o'clock he was already inside Hayes Technologies headquarters preparing for the shareholder meeting scheduled later that afternoon. Executives moved through the building carrying presentation materials while assistants coordinated schedules and security arrangements. The atmosphere felt important but familiar. Ryan had led countless meetings before. This one, however, carried a level of attendance that continued to puzzle him. Every major shareholder had confirmed. Several former advisors who rarely appeared in person were attending as well. Even a few individuals connected to the earliest days of the company had unexpectedly accepted invitations. As Ryan reviewed financial projections in the executive conference room, his chief financial officer entered carrying a folder. "There is something you should probably see." Ryan looked up. "What is it?" Additional agenda items were added late Friday. Ryan opened the folder and scanned the pages. Near the end of the meeting schedule was a section labeled Historical Ownership Clarification and Governance Review. He frowned. Who requested this? The chief financial officer hesitated. Corporate legal. Ryan felt a brief flash of irritation. Without discussing it with me? Apparently the request came through proper authority. The answer only deepened his confusion. Meanwhile, several miles away, Charlotte stood in front of her bedroom mirror fastening a simple navy blue blazer. There was nothing flashy about her appearance. No expensive jewelry. No dramatic statement. She looked composed, professional, and calm. On the dining table rested a leather portfolio containing documents that had remained largely unseen for nearly a decade. Her phone rang shortly before noon. "Everything is ready," her lead attorney informed her. "The presentation has been uploaded and verified." Charlotte thanked him and ended the call. She took one final look around the penthouse. For years this place had represented a life built on silence, patience, and sacrifice. By the end of the day, many assumptions surrounding that life would disappear. At headquarters, guests began arriving shortly after 1 o'clock. Luxury vehicles lined the entrance. Investors greeted one another in the lobby. Members of the board exchanged handshakes and business updates. Ryan moved through the crowd confidently, accepting compliments and discussing future expansion plans. Several people congratulated him on recent personal developments, assuming his future was brighter than ever. Then something unexpected happened. A distinguished elderly investor named Harold Whitmore entered the lobby. Harold had invested in the company during its earliest years and rarely attended public events anymore. Ryan approached him warmly. "Harold, it is good to see you." The older man smiled politely but immediately looked beyond Ryan toward the entrance. "Has she arrived yet?" Ryan blinked. "Who?" Harold seemed surprised by the question. Before he could answer, movement near the front doors captured everyone's attention. Conversations slowed. Heads turned. Charlotte had just entered the building. For a moment Ryan assumed she must be there to finalize some personal matter. But then something strange happened. Several investors straightened their posture. 2 board members immediately walked toward her. Harold Whitmore himself stepped forward with visible respect. And as Charlotte crossed the lobby, more than one influential shareholder greeted her with the exact same words. "Good afternoon, Ms. Hayes. We have been waiting for you." Ryan stood motionless as Charlotte exchanged greetings with people he considered some of the most influential figures connected to Hayes Technologies. The reactions around him made no sense. These were investors who rarely acknowledged anyone outside the executive circle. Yet one after another approached Charlotte with genuine respect. Harold Whitmore even pulled out a chair beside him in the front row of the conference hall and personally invited her to sit there. Ryan felt a knot form in his stomach. "What exactly is going on?" he asked one board member quietly. The man looked surprised. "You do not know?" Before Ryan could press further, the meeting was called to order. More than 100 attendees filled the room. Shareholders, attorneys, executives, advisors, and investors settled into their seats as presentations began. For the first hour, everything appeared normal. Revenue growth was discussed. Expansion strategies were reviewed. Market forecasts were presented. Ryan gradually relaxed. Perhaps he had been overthinking the strange interactions in the lobby. Then the meeting reached the final section of the agenda: historical ownership clarification and governance review. The room became noticeably quieter. Several investors sat forward. A large screen illuminated at the front of the hall. Ryan glanced toward the legal team. He expected a routine compliance update. Instead, the lead attorney stepped to the podium and announced, "The following review concerns foundational ownership records, original capital contributions, governance authority, and corporate formation history." Ryan exchanged a confused look with his chief financial officer. Neither understood why such information was being discussed publicly. The attorney continued, "For transparency purposes, all documents presented today have been independently verified by multiple legal and accounting firms." The first document appeared on the screen. It showed formation records from nearly a decade earlier. Ryan recognized the paperwork immediately. He had signed those documents himself. Then another page appeared, followed by another, then another. Dates, agreements, funding authorizations, trust structures, ownership transfers. The deeper the presentation moved into company history, the more uncomfortable Ryan became. Several records included signatures he had not seen in years. Some included details he barely remembered. Across the room, Charlotte remained completely calm. She listened without taking notes and without reacting to the growing tension. The attorney eventually paused and addressed the audience directly. "Many assumptions have existed regarding the origins of Hayes Technologies. Today, we are presenting the complete historical record." A new slide appeared. It listed the earliest capital contributions that allowed the company to survive its first 18 months. Ryan stared at the numbers. They were far larger than he remembered. Then he saw something even more surprising. The source of those funds was not listed under his name. Murmurs began spreading through the audience. Investors exchanged glances. Board members reviewed printed copies of supporting documents. Ryan felt his pulse quicken. "There has to be a mistake," he whispered, but nobody around him appeared confused. In fact, several attendees looked as though they had been expecting this moment for a long time. At the front of the room, the attorney clicked to the next slide. A single name appeared in bold letters beneath the heading "Original Strategic Benefactor." The entire room turned toward Charlotte. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything Ryan had experienced in his professional life. On the massive screen at the front of the conference hall, beneath the heading "Original Strategic Benefactor," appeared a single name: Charlotte Hayes. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The room seemed frozen between disbelief and realization. Ryan stared at the screen, convinced there had to be an explanation. Some clerical error, some legal misunderstanding, some technical mistake that would be corrected within moments. Instead, the lead attorney calmly continued. "The documentation presented today confirms that the initial capital responsible for sustaining Hayes Technologies during its most vulnerable period originated through assets controlled by Charlotte Hayes." Another document appeared, then another, then another. Each one carried dates, signatures, and verification stamps. Investors reviewed printed copies while board members compared records. The evidence was overwhelming. Ryan felt his confidence slipping away with every page displayed on the screen. "That cannot be right," he finally said aloud. His voice echoed more loudly than he intended. Several heads turned toward him. The attorney acknowledged the comment respectfully. Every document has undergone independent review. He pressed a button and a timeline appeared. The earliest months of the company were mapped across the screen. Financial shortages, missed funding opportunities, investor withdrawals, cash flow crises, events Ryan remembered all too well. Then another layer of information appeared beneath them. Emergency funding authorizations, strategic acquisitions, intellectual property purchases, bridge financing agreements, each one traced back to entities connected to Charlotte. Murmurs spread across the room. Some shareholders looked genuinely shocked. Others appeared relieved that the information was finally becoming public. Ryan looked toward Charlotte. She remained composed. No triumph, no anger, no satisfaction, just quiet patience. The attorney continued. There is another matter requiring clarification. A new slide appeared. It listed several patents that had become foundational to the company's growth. Ryan recognized them immediately. Those patents had helped transform Hayes Technologies from a struggling startup into a major industry player. Ownership records indicate that these intellectual property assets were originally acquired and secured through Charlotte Hayes prior to their integration into company operations. The room erupted into conversation. Investors exchanged stunned looks. Board members whispered among themselves. Ryan felt the ground shifting beneath everything he thought he knew. Why was this never disclosed? Someone asked from the audience. The lead attorney turned toward Charlotte. For the first time that afternoon, every eye in the room focused completely on her. Charlotte stood slowly. The room immediately became silent again. Because it was never about recognition, she said calmly. At the time, the company needed stability, not attention. I believed success would speak for itself. Her voice carried no bitterness. That made the moment even more powerful. She was not attacking anyone. She was simply stating facts. An elderly investor rose from his seat. For years, many of us knew there was an unseen force protecting this company during difficult periods. We simply honored the request for privacy. Ryan stared at him in disbelief. You knew. The investor nodded. Some of us did. The realization struck harder than any financial revelation. People he respected had known pieces of the truth for years. The company he believed he had built alone had survived because someone else had quietly carried risks he never fully understood. As another verified document appeared on the screen, the attorney delivered the statement that changed the atmosphere of the room completely. Based on the authenticated ownership structure, Charlotte Hayes is not merely an early supporter of Hayes Technologies. She is recognized within the governing records as the original controlling founder. The room remained silent long after the attorney finished speaking. Ryan felt as though every sound around him had become distant and distorted. Original controlling founder. The words repeated in his mind while shareholders reviewed documents that seemed to rewrite the history of his entire career. He looked toward Charlotte again, searching for some sign that this was a misunderstanding. Instead, she stood calmly beside the conference table while another presentation appeared on the screen. The governance review is not yet complete, the attorney announced. Several attendees immediately focused their attention on the next series of documents. A detailed ownership structure filled the screen. Legal entities, trusts, intellectual property holdings, and investment vehicles appeared one after another. Each layer revealed a deeper connection between Charlotte and the company that few people had ever understood. Ryan watched as percentages, signatures, and dates were displayed for everyone to see. Then came the moment that changed everything. Based on the verified ownership records currently in force, the attorney continued, the controlling interest connected to these assets remains under Charlotte Hayes. A murmur swept through the audience. Investors began comparing documents. Some executives looked visibly stunned. Ryan leaned forward. What controlling interest? He asked. The attorney clicked to another slide. Several holding companies appeared on the screen. Those companies owned major portions of Hayes Technologies. Others controlled valuable patents, licensing agreements, and strategic partnerships. Every path ultimately led back to the same destination. Charlotte. The realization spread through the room like a wave. For years people had assumed Ryan stood at the top of the corporate structure. In reality, the foundation beneath that structure had always belonged to someone else. An executive seated near the front raised a hand. "Are these ownership positions still active today?" The attorney answered immediately. "Yes, all records have been confirmed and remain legally enforceable." Another shareholder asked, "Does that include the intellectual property portfolio?" "Yes." "The licensing agreements?" "Yes." "The original trust structure?" "Yes." Each answer landed harder than the last. Ryan could see expressions changing across the room. Some investors who had spent years courting his approval were now looking toward Charlotte instead. Others appeared relieved, as though long-standing questions had finally been answered. The shift in attention was impossible to ignore. For the first time in years, Ryan was no longer the center of the room. Charlotte was. The attorney opened the final section of the presentation. "There is one additional clarification." A summary chart appeared. It listed the assets tied to the ownership network: corporate equity, licensing revenue, strategic investment funds, commercial real estate interests, intellectual property rights. The combined value stretched far beyond what most people in the room had expected. Ryan stared at the total figure displayed at the bottom of the screen. His face lost color. Even members of the board exchanged shocked looks. The scale was enormous. Everything he believed represented his empire was connected to a structure built, protected, and ultimately controlled by Charlotte. Across the hall, reporters invited to observe the governance review began taking notes. Investors whispered among themselves. Executives checked documents repeatedly, hoping they had misunderstood something. Yet every page pointed to the same conclusion. Charlotte had never been standing beside the empire. She had been standing above its foundation the entire time. And as the meeting moved toward its final resolution, everyone in the room understood that the balance of power had already shifted. By the time the final documents had been reviewed, nobody in the conference hall was looking at Ryan the same way. The confidence that had surrounded him at the beginning of the afternoon had vanished, replaced by uncertainty and uncomfortable questions. Yet Charlotte did not appear interested in humiliating anyone. She remained calm while the legal team completed the presentation and distributed the final governance report. When the meeting chair asked whether she wished to make a closing statement, she stood and walked slowly to the front of the room. Every conversation stopped. Every eye followed her. For years, she had been the quiet figure standing in the background of company events. Now she commanded the attention of everyone present without raising her voice. "I did not request this meeting to embarrass anyone," she began. "The purpose of today was accuracy." The room remained silent. Charlotte looked toward the shareholders. Many people here invested their trust, their time, and their resources into this company. They deserved a complete understanding of its history. Several investors nodded. Her words carried no bitterness, only clarity. Then she turned toward Ryan. For a brief moment, the entire room seemed to disappear around them. "When we first started, success was never supposed to belong to one person," she said. "It was supposed to be something we built together." Ryan lowered his eyes. Memories he had ignored for years returned all at once. Long nights, difficult decisions, moments when failure had seemed unavoidable, moments when Charlotte had quietly solved problems without asking for recognition. He realized that the story he had repeated for years had been incomplete. Charlotte continued, "I never needed credit. I never needed applause. I only believed that respect should grow alongside success." No one interrupted. No one disagreed. The truth was too visible now. The legal review concluded shortly afterward. Formal resolutions were adopted. Governance records were updated. The meeting that Ryan had expected to strengthen his position had instead revealed a reality he had never fully understood. As attendees began leaving their seats, investors approached Charlotte one after another. Some thanked her for her honesty. Others apologized for assumptions they had made. Meanwhile, Ryan remained seated, For the first time in many years, he had nothing to say. Eventually, Charlotte collected her portfolio and headed toward the exit. Ryan stood and followed her into the lobby. "Charlotte," he called. She stopped and turned. The city skyline glowed beyond the glass walls behind her. For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, Ryan said, "Why did you never tell me?" Charlotte considered the question carefully. "Because I thought one day you would notice without being told." The answer struck harder than any legal document. Ryan looked away. "I was wrong about a lot of things." Charlotte offered a small, sincere smile. "Then learn from them." There was no anger in her voice, no desire for revenge, only finality. She thanked him for the years they had shared, wished him well, and walked toward the revolving doors. Ryan remained where he was, watching as she disappeared into the evening light. For the first time, he understood that true power had never come from ownership, titles, or public praise. It came from character. And the person who possessed the most of it had quietly walked away without needing to prove anything more.
Sometimes people who contribute the most receive the least recognition. Charlotte never demanded applause. She never asked for praise. She only carried the responsibility that nobody could see. Many people spend years chasing the credits while forgetting the value of gratitude. Ryan's greatest mistake wasn't ask for a divorce. It was believed that success only belonging to the person who's standing in the spotlight. Behind victory are many sacrifices that stand behind the stage. Behind many victory are many sacrifices that never appear on the stage. This story reminds us that respect should never be based on title, status, wealth, or public recognition. Because the strongest people who are often the one working quietly, the no one watching. And sometimes the greatest form of power is not proving someone wrong. It's walking away knowing the truth can speak for itself. If this story touched your heart, remember, never estimate the quiet person beside you. You may not understand the sacrifice they made to build up the life that you enjoy today. And gratitude, when forgotten, often comes with regret. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.